Yak A away yuxatini. To cut you on. Gonna chi shayukatangidat aya hinaki. Yak. Ye awa achtu yak aya yagi. Quash tatke awa tashi yuxatin. Ya achietki hasu kudzati yagi. Ya sakutin aya. We a kachkatil sacht at away. At has skaudul. At has skabul sechen. Yewe achtu yak A. Ya khana. Chayego genki aha yukatangi dati jituni. Gwall dasa wtulliach I da kachat achtuasagu yuakshi yich sani. Kayat atsu tleidihin. Ya kusuk adir jiwach yetki ai. Ye awush unayáade at aya akayeti. Ya shakshani kakachwani shas kachwus. Dasa we linkit renacha ayata. Glidcha renach opposites yiduasaga at ushqunayáade a. Ye awe weta kaweta kadasa yituasagu yiqaywusi. Shukwa ayaqwa yituagesagu gwashe linkit renach. Wooch in yuq ʼadudli.átk yaqnachawi keqwak e. Yewa adatiu tuchtatan. Yaegi qatliatke. Tleidihin awe chwaachtu. Kleinach a yuhan wishkalnik. Kawayiktach a ye. Tlelkadeen wudasku adat. Kawayiktach qunit gwalgiwe yiduasak. Kawayikt qunit wan qanins ya achietki. Hastu inkachanik adat. Ja at aya at wudakini at tlelwudasku akudachsawe. Ja kawayiktach aya. Wan qanins wutusatin. Wan qanins kadishkit tsu we an kadishkiti at. Ye awe chak gwal an kadishkiti at de tuasagu atigudi an. Yege at tach yege. Ya yidat just yata. Jadasa ach tuasagu kachshikiti. Keshilzi. Guk siri guk. Kayega kwati. Oh, awa ach. Ye awe wan qanins. UFO yuduasagu at. Hechwasagu dasa ye ji adat. Khadra tlel khasatin. Tleidihin aya khasatin. We ki waka wudzunayi. Shqakwek e khatbuti. Yeach tuasagu atwagu dia ach keilkitin. Khasatin. We ki waka wudzunayi. Tat yin awa. Echats kanachaya khasatin. Qatkhaya nahachuch. Adatawe yutuchtatan. Kelkonachua de kik. Aka khasatin. Shashaki de awa wuha. Gakeujatuk. Ye awechwaach. Ka a itch atsu. Gwash take a shukat a. Shqakwek echat butin. Ye ach keitli. Just take a or ach keitli. Usk keitli yadi hu. Ye ach lil kutsu keitl du chank aya ye butin. Peanut you do sock or you do socken. Ye ach lil keitli. Chatko a keitl. Ye ach tuasagu khosai keitl. Just hasawe ya achlilk. Du yit hiti. Yik awa uachayan. Uchayan. Gwall naska du shuga. Ta awe chwata
I
yes.
think so.
Aka awe. Chwaach.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Isa chwaach. Natasha kayis tla. Aka awe ye awe chwaach. Jo ya. We heshwet disku ka. Jowe kahat kach awe. Kunachawe ye kandal gwatch. خدقة واسعتني يا أخ كيت ليدي أخ ليل كيت قنا خوي قني حسو الشا قنا خوي حسو الشا رف 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 يا أوي كاو دقوال أوي وي كهيس جاك أوي تلوي تقصدي وي قاون ديخ تاوزن أيا يدو ساك وي تاك ها قا أوي تاك دي أوي خو جود عادي يا أخ ليل أخ جيت خيو دتان يستينجه تلاك داسك شوي كي وقادزوني دها آني كا تلتي كيك ودستيني أتوي ودزتيني أتقنخوي يا تلتكت ويقاو قل تاوق دسي ناس كدوشو قاو تاوق دسي تلكي وآ كاكاو جقيت قنخوي جو ياوي يه اندقن قنخوي أخو وي هونداكي هيدي تلتكت قا كل هستي تواسقو داتي وهسقاو الأتكن هاي أخوستين جويا ديخ آته يا دايخ دي أوه تلشق أقويق آيا وآن كت آيا وها نتاسهيني آيه وتين يا أوه خوسكو أدان يسكو قا كاويك دخقو نيد يستينك وكاويك دياكو خد قوت لك تخوستين UFO شكشنيكي
Pleidahin UFO Chwesetin Chat Ka Achuni Dempster Highway Naki Watu Kuch Achuni Kut Ayanaha Yakyeti Tlech Tot Awe Tlech Tot Awe Achuni ja UFO Chwesetin Ka Kunach Tunach cuddle tips binoculars with tusitin Nusk kucheta yach awe gun yach yeti has yosehich around each other Hatsnach Yosehich Chess Ute Yosehich yeah Achuni Tlech du Tua Ushku Tlech Chat Aya Ach Tua Sigu Adat De Oe
Gunnel cheese ha inskell sneaky okay Johansu Yisatinge Yisukuge ada ia achake witlek ashkashnik ada it gaat late graag enach het was ook kwati
Wat witach kasi ye eta wilsitin tlek de hin you yauk dat Chuklewa tuj tawak dissik she 1x 2013 itu wasak talk with you atach tlekin Chunach kawa gaat you taat. Jakut geen hakal tin. Jakut geen hakal le tin jak taat kanach you gaat jaklak. You took a tangit. Awe ya take it at husitin. Shukwana khawa satellite khujin. Akwawe chiga nagatsitina we. Teja Chayuk utakhawa. Tle Ḳaa Ée Dultóow gas wait at Tlach achtuako siye. Tlach kasiye at khawe. Wani kasiwa fowe.
Gulchish ha inchkeil nigi. Ha, Gwan qanins kasi atawa wudud sitin. Ya ha'anika kach akina. Yewa wan qanins akhu aw. Has aw sitin kasi at we at katu. Gwalli saku we Tlechwydysgwr atawa chwtsiti ha'anika. Chag we atlen akwustian. Qustin at yeo shachdakwan qanins yidu asaga atse. Qa wutusakuan qanins ya askatuyi qawe tlenach yati a we qa. Kasi atawe gwal yekakwasti. Yeawe gunalchish aya qanach ltikat Johan. Oh, tunach kudatis. Oh, you can't gunalchish. Yeawe gunalchish ha reid isa achi. Yeawe gwal qone aya llingich de gachtil tu. Wan qanin zach tuasaku chakut at aya adat. Wooch yuch qatil atki. Ach tuasaku yisaku chaltakata tatuasaku adat yu qatil atki llingich qinach aya qanacha ke qake. Yewe wan qanins kagachtu aq. Gwalchis qone ayashtu iltu llingit iguayach wan. Qadlan hini qanach oe yak e. Tlchis we tlech a qaq us tlech we yin atade yekakwati. Iltakat qada it. Yewe ch'aq. Deshooch. Tlitzin qa. Yewe uhan su wan qanins kagachtu aq. Yewe gunalchish. Tlechach enach hi ide kakwanik. Gwal chagud qa. Yitu agesaku qa. Yuqiyatani shukwa. Tlingit qinach.
Chatsu tleidahin kawayik yak chosatin. Chatahlik echadwuti. Alutek anika. Adachawe. Wanganins kasaye. Juni chosatin. Chatwude ak. Tlatachtua ushguya. Kasaye. Junke chosatin. Goodness cheese.
Okay. Gulchish ha inchkil nigi. Okay. Zukke. Okay. Well, folks, welcome. I like to start Tlingit gatherings with Tlingit language, and so sometimes I'll just try and think of different things for us to talk about. And those of you who are newer to studying Tlingit, just hang in there. Try not to tune out. Just try to like catch things or see if okay, what are they talking about? And this is never done to be excluding anybody. But it's really important to just be around the language. And also I want people to see like we could talk what were we talking about? Anybody?
UFOs.
Yeah, we're talking about UFOs and have you seen them and what do you think? And And I was sort of talking about like I've never seen one. I've seen a couple of meteors. We call them. There's some cool terms. Kiwa is like in Tlingit with directions. It's really interesting because you could say kina. A kina is above something. Ach kina is above me. Kinde is upwards. K is also kind of upwards. Diki is getting way up there. Chats is the sky. And then you got Kiwa, which is like way up in the heavens. And like there's kind of some thinking, if you go to the old school way of thinking with Tlingit, just to share like how it works in the language, there's this concept called atuwu or achtuwu, ituwu, qatuwu. And that's a pretty complicated concept, I think, to translate. But I would say my first thought would be feelings, but it could also mean thoughts, intentions, desires, the living spirit, a consciousness. Any of those things would be tu. And that's inside living creatures, especially humans. Cuisine.
You say I'm saying ka ahini UFO, like I'm a believer of UFO.
Oh yeah, you'd say UFO achahin.
UFO akain. Okay.
Or and you could also like you can believe something. So there's this verb to believe something, and you usually put like this little suffix onto something, and that's what you believe. So I could say ik achahin, I believe you, but it could also mean I believe in you. But you can also say I'll say like something k and then achahin. So this is like, well, I'm going to use the letter n in here. So this is I believe n, right? So that's basically what you're saying. So you say atk achahin, I believe in something. And then there's this one, I'll get to the question 1 second. And then you can also say yeh, whoops, I hit the wrong button. Yehwa G. I don't know, I did everything. I hit a button and everything moved around. So yehwa G would be I believe, or I suspect, but not like I suspect, like not like you're playing Clue or something, like to be suspicious or to be suspicious of somebody. But you theorize on something, you can say yehwa G, and then you can tie a second verb in there. So I would probably say yehwa G dakhtusti, I believe they exist. If you want to, I'm not saying like, I'm just saying if you wanted to say that, believe whatever you want. I think it's fun to use Tlingit to just talk about like things of today as well. It's an ancient language, it's a sacred language, but it's also a language. We can use it to talk about all kinds of stuff. Okay, I saw a hand came up.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of X-Files lately. Is there a way to say I want to believe?
Oh yeah, okay. So I'm putting these in the chat so that you can copy them. If that doesn't work, let me know, because sometimes I'll put these into like a document and share the document, and then it's maybe a little bigger. So the first thing is like there's this phrase. I'm also not actively translating what I'm putting in the chat all the time. So dakhtusti is like it's a relational form. Say they exist, but it's tied to another verb. So when you tie two verbs together, usually one of the verbs goes through a change, right? Like in English, you don't necessarily have to do that. You could just say, it's good you're here. And I could say, it's good, and I could say, you're here. But in Tlingit, I would say, it's good you're here ye. Like I would have to put a little something on the second verb to tie them together. So achtuasagu is I like or I want. And there's no way to really differentiate between that. If you want to say like, I like your shirt, you should say actually, your shirt is nice or your shirt is pleasing. Because if you say I like your shirt, you're going to end up saying I want your shirt. And this, so liking and wanting go hand in hand. I also believe that in Tlingit, we don't really say things like, I love coffee, and I love ice cream, and I love that movie. Like that love verb, I think, is usually used for living creatures. You'd usually just say, whenever I go to I love with something like, I love sliding or whatever, the elders that I worked with, they would always translate it as ach tuasaku, I like it, or I want it. And so it leads me to believe in Tlingit, you didn't spend a lot of time talking about things you liked, which is, you do that in English, right? Like, what's your top 5 movies, and what do you like? And you got favorites too. I don't think favorites and best friends, I don't think those things really exist in Tlingit, which is fine. They don't have to. We could think differently in different languages. So you have ach tuasagu, and then we're going to get the second verb. So I'm going to put these 2 dots in front of it. And so I would say, ach tuasagu atk achahini. I want to believe in something. But that's getting interesting as well, because the atk achahin literally means I believe in something. But just the way the language has changed over the years, atkahini is usually used to talk about someone who is a Christian, a believer. So, and so it's linked with the Christian faith. And so, but you could say, ach tuasagu, ach tuasagu. I want to believe they exist. Ach tuasagu. Like, I don't know if you want to tie like 2 multiple things together. So oh yeah, ye'awe achtuati has tusti.
Kochlidal akahini tachtuati.
Okay.
I want to believe it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll put it in the chat. Yeah, achtuati is very similar to achtuasagu. So achtuati could mean that's how I feel, or that's how I think, or also that's how I believe. So without the atk, so with that T in there, it's believing in something. Ak'achahini is believing in it. So with Tlingit, you're going to get into a bunch of really interesting discussions with objects and subjects, like who's the thing happening to and who's doing the thing, and you're gonna have to move those things around a lot in your brain. And so there's sort of, for me, there's kind of these 3 things that happen when you learn Tlingit, I think. One is like you end up thinking about a language, just like English. How does English work? Now I got to question how it all works. And then the other thing is building up the Tlingit, like this whole Tlingit language and way of thinking. Then there's going to be this thing in the middle so that you can get to the grammar and all these other things, like you know. And so it's really interesting. And then yeah, so and also, like, for something to exist, we're getting into this interesting territory, because if you say kusti at, it should mean something that exists, but it means like a giant. So and the questions are fun, because question leads to a question, leads to a thought, leads to a question, leads to a thought. And so it's fun, because it's like you just open like bentwood box within a bentwood box within a bentwood box. So I was talking about, I had the dog, and I like to walk my dog, and I saw like a meteor. So back to Hakina is above us, Diki is way up in the sky, Kiwa is this place where people go, but not like the old school way of thinking. So there's a person has tu, tu, and a person also has what we call a yakwaheaku. So ayakwaheyaku is the spirit that embodies everything. There's a spirit that embodies everything. The mouse I caught today, ayakwaheyaku kutsati. There's a spirit in it, so I'm moving away from traps that kill, and I'm moving in towards traps that just capture. Although I have a cat, and that cat kills. She's a killing machine. But then she's so fierce. But then after she's done, she's like, snuggle me. And cats are so interesting to me. Like just apex predators, right? Anyways, so I had a dog, and I was walking it, and I saw a meteor, and a meteor we call Kiwakawu Zunai, the missile of the heavenly people. So the heavenly people, Kiwakawu, is what we call, that's not everybody. So a long time ago, a lot of people reincarnated. That's just what happened in Tlingit Tundatani. A lot of people came back. But also, sometimes you could come back as a spirit helper. Sometimes you could come back as another person. Yes, there's a spirit in everything. So you're very careful the way you talk to things. So like even if I have to take out a mouse, but I set it free today. I'll usually talk to them like, and then blam them. But Kiwa is where people go who die some sort of violent death, suicide, or they get killed in battle. Something really, really harsh happens. They end up in this other place. That's very interesting to me because it's related to the eclipse. It's also related to comets, and it's also related to the Northern Lights. So, and then there's another term, Kiwakawu Yahayi, which is a term for like some sort of mental disability, so autism or whatever kind of spectrum. That the terms change over time as more and more is understood about the brain and how it functions, and so those things are all related. But so that's what I was talking about. And then this other time, this meteor came really close to town, and it lit up the town even though it was all dark. And I slept right through the whole thing, but everybody told me all about it. And then some other folks shared some stories about UFOs. I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about. It's kind of in the news these days, I think. I think it's always in the news, but just periodically. So, yeah, hey. So any language things you folks have been thinking about? I thought today would, let's see, I think you folks did some sound practice. I thought we might do some of that. We might do some of the origins of Tlingit, if you folks are interested in that, the writing system and how it kind of functions. Then I thought we'd take a break, and then Ida and I developed this presentation, which is an intro to the Tlingit verb, which is for those who've been studying for a little while. There's a whole bunch of stuff about, you just really get to, like, I think, learning how to pronounce things, learning the names for things, learning a bunch of fill-in-the-blank phrases, learning a bunch of common sort of things that you might want to say. But then you've got to sort of unlock the verb, which is, I think, a big difference between memorization and speaking. There's a whole bunch of stuff smushed together. And then there's a whole bunch of symbols that we use to talk about it. And I don't want to overwhelm anybody, but I also want to just say, if you can get comfortable dealing with this stuff, you can really unlock a lot of language use, especially since there's not, if you could just go live with someone and no one came around you and spoke English very often, and you only spoke Tlingit, you could probably learn it in like a year, like just poof. And you might not need any of this stuff. But because there's so much other stuff going on, I think to transition from English to bilingual, I think you need a few things to help you along the way. So you got any questions, things you're thinking about? Language related, like it's always fun to visit and catch up, but we gotta stay on track with the language learning stuff.
Just related to like what you said before. So like the Kion, so it's like up in the sky, and then like the Kau. Wait, so what's the Hashigania part in like after a prayer? Like Dikian Kau Hashigania, like what does that translate to?
So
Sorry, I was just wondering.
no, it's okay. Hashagina is really interesting to me. So that is a pre-contact term for the creator. Post-contact, then you get Daki, which is up above. Unkawu is a basically a high-class person, like the Anyadi and Ankawu is what you call basically the noble people of a place. And so Daki and Kawu would be like the nobleman way up high. And then there's Dayi and Kawu, which would be the nobleman way down low. So those are translated from Christianity. So you get like God and the devil is basically Daki and Kawu and Dayi and Kawu. And then Hashaganya, it shields us, it protects us. So there's a few things that are in there as far as components. So the ha part is our, so that's a possessive pronoun. And then the sha, I think, is probably our heads. The ge is to go against something or to be touching something. And then the nya is a word that means to be in the vicinity of something or to be shielding something. Like hun is the north wind and hunya is the shield of the north, protecting from the north wind. So they'll call it sometimes, you'll hear people say huna and hunya, and just in terms of like how to translate that word, there's a number of different words that you're going to learn in Tlingit that are all over the place. Nia is sometimes you'll see it as Nia or Yina. It's in a whole bunch of the clan names, Nanya Ayi. It's in a bunch of the place names, Sanya, Henya. So this Nia term you're going to find in quite a few different places. And it could mean protecting, shielding, or it could mean in the vicinity of. Yeah, very good questions. And let's see. A practice paragraph. Yeah, sure. So what we're going to do, so tomorrow, we're going to just look at a few stories, and we're going to talk about how to use stories to continue to learn Tlingit. And I know a lot of folks have talked about wanting to develop basically some scripts to learn from. Like, can we have a scripted story that people kind of memorize? And we've got a few of them. Some of them are longer, some of them are short. And then also some sort of template style speeches, because speeches and stories are good places to learn. But then there's also the day-to-day stuff, because once you start getting into performance Tlingit, like it's a whole other, it really ramps up. You need to do lots with metaphors, your grammar needs to get more complicated. And so it's also good to just, so I think the three things, so we're going to learn a bunch of stuff. We're also going to focus on showing you some stories, including some really short versions, and then some speeches. And then also sort of like we can work on some templates. Like if you end up having to speak on behalf of a clan or a group or a community, like here's some things you can, like here's your sort of emergency speech kit. And then we'll also just do some conversational stuff, because the conversation stuff it's less formal, so the language doesn't tend to, sometimes Tlingit wants to just turn the dials up to 11, just say, oh, we got to get super complex with the metaphors and the these linking all these concepts and stuff. So yeah, that'd be great. So we'll work on doing that over the next 2.5 weeks, and then kind of we'll think also about like when this thing ends, even it's going to be big. If we got like 40 of us, it would be nice if just on the last day everybody said one thing. So you might have to buckle in for kind of a longer. We'll see. I don't think it'll go like Pu'ik level 14 hours of speeches. But it'd be nice if everybody, and even if you're just getting started, it could be pretty short. It's ʼadudli.átk.
So I see duya awunai. I put it in the chat. Duya awuane, for the they singular respects them. And then in another place I found duye wukanai, which would be I respect them. So then I was trying to create I respect you. So I would like correction to my last note there. I ya awukane.
Okay, let me find. So when you look up a verb, so let me show you folks. So this is, there's a number of different resources, and learning how to use these resources is important. So there's the Verb Dictionary, which came out in the 1970s. There is, oh, I lost the chat, okay. Then there's the Dictionary of Tlingit, which came out in, I think, the early 2000s. And then there's a whole bunch of other things as well. This wonderful set of notes, handwritten by Jeff Lear, and then this incredible database put together by Carrie Eggleston. So basically, if you look up a verb, and there's kind of a software glitch right now, so I can't do a search. If I do a search, like, it'll just freeze this whole thing. So I'll try and figure that out over the weekend. But these are, for the most part, searchable dictionaries, as long as your computers are doing what they're supposed to do. But there's a couple things as we study Tlingit. And one thing is, sometimes there's what a word means or a phrase, and then we'll sort of pull the thing apart to show you some of the pieces. And the reason to do that is just to say, well, I want you to be able to recognize these things when you see them in other places. But that doesn't mean like you shouldn't have to alter what, because like sometimes when you put these things together, they just mean something different. Like that's what this thing means. But then sometimes we'll pull apart to show you the pieces that are there so that you can just start to become more familiar with them as you go forward. Yeah, so like if I were to interpret Hashaganya, I would say the creator. But you know, there's different ways that people might want to sort of interpret that. Similarly, when you go to look up a verb, you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff here. Like, okay, capital N plus ya plus a ya capital S, this weird zero marker, a root symbol, nay, and then the number 4. So like, and we're not trying to like say you need like some sort of graphing calculator to be able to speak Tlingit. But what this is decades of trying to figure out how do you code this stuff so you can give people the information. And so basically each of these will tell you like there's some things in here, and then that can send you into basically these tables and stuff to figure out what kinds of things go in there. Because there's lots of moving pieces. So to go through, the capital N is a noun. That's all it is just a noun. So you put a noun there, then you have to have ya after the noun. Then you have a ya wu, or you have this combination of things. You'll learn later what these are. Each of these have both meaning and a grammar function. So they change the verb somehow. Then you get to the capital S for the subject. So this is who does it. And there's this list of subject pronouns that you'll learn. Ḳa is me, tu is us, I is you, ye is y'all. The third person is always unmarked, so that's always interesting with Tlingit. So you'd say, I do it, you do it, does it. There wouldn't be any he, she, they, nothing. You just go straight to the verb, which sometimes drives people nuts. Then there is a fourth person, like so people do it. This is the classifier. Every verb has a classifier. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Later today, what it does, what it is. And then this is the verb root. That contains the meaning. Okay, that contains the meaning. And then usually if there's any numbers after it, that means there's multiple of these ne verb roots. That's all it's showing you. It's like there's some other ne one that means something else. Okay? So as you go through, when you look at the definition for subject to respect, regard highly, think highly of noun. So now, if you wanted to respect someone, what you'll learn is how to change these. There's this set of possessive pronouns. And so if you go down to, well, these only show you third person. So this would be ayachane. So I could say iya ayachane. So there's two things you change from de, the third person, to I, the second person, and from nothing, the third person, to ḳa, the first person. So there are a lot of moving parts there. If you're new to Tlingit, don't freak out. We're gonna pull this whole thing back. We just like to start the class with some questions that folks have, because if you stick with it, if you stick with your learning of Tlingit, you'll be talking about all this stuff. You're like, oh yeah, okay, that's the object and the subject. Oh, that's the classifier. And you got to kind of nerd out a little bit, I think, to just overcome the complexity of it. It's a complicated language, but there's only so many things that are in there. So this shows you also like a command form, a prohibitive form. So do it, don't do it. What we call, and we also use these different terms. And don't get mad about these terms, because Tlingit does not change the verbs for time, and English does. It changes it for event, and that means we just got to have a different sort of way to talk about it, because you can have things that are sort of what you might consider past tense in English, but they're happening right now. That can happen. It happens regularly. Then you have sort of happening now, not happening now. We call those perfective and negative imperfective. Progressive imperfective, it's in a process, it's beginning to happen. And then future and negative future. And there's more than these. But when I was putting this dictionary together, I was like, well, these are the ones you need, I think, to talk. If you want to go, if you can get fancy with Tlingit, it gets fancier than this, but that's enough. That's enough. And so I'll show you one more resource so that you folks know it. And then we'll talk about like how to find all this stuff. You know, you gotta dive into all this stuff. Let me see, what am I? So the verb database looks like this. So it's a big list of verb roots. And so the other thing that you'll learn how to do as you learn Tlingit is you will learn how to spot a verb root. So you'll hear a verb and there'll be a whole bunch of stuff, and then you'll catch that verb root. And it's really interesting because we went probably 60 years without raising any kids in Tlingit. Like, I mean, just full on, they were around Tlingit all the time. There's certainly children who were around it, but they were, a lot of them raised in English. Like they would know a lot of Tlingit words and they would know a lot of phrases, but just in terms of like full on interpretation. And there are lots of people who've been born over the last 60 years who can understand Tlingit, but we did go quite a long time without making new speakers. And that's changed in the past 20 years, especially. But we don't know how kids learn Tlingit. If a kid became fully bilingual from birth, we're not exactly sure how they learn. But there's quite a few kids now who are being raised in the language and around the language. And so when they don't understand something, we are catching them asking us about this. They're catching the verb root. So they'll just throw out the verb root. What's this mean? And they'll just throw out the root. And we're like, ooh, look at that. They caught that. So for here, we're going to go down to ne. So this is searchable. So you can go in here and say, I'm looking for the verb for walk, and I'm looking for the verb for untangle, and you can do a search for those. But you kind of got to know the verb root in order to really get in here and start using this. So we'll go down to ne, N-E-I, and we see two of them. So this shows you the types of verbs that are in there, right? Well, this actually shows you what the verb root means. So we see respect right here, and that's the one we're looking for. So if I click on the blue, it's going to expand it. And each of these yellow bars shows us a different verb. So that's a different verb, that's a different verb, that's a different verb. So here's the respect, and so I can click on the yellow, and that expands it again. And then we get first person, third person. First person is the speaker, talking about themselves. Second person is the speaker, talking about the person they're talking to. Third person is the speaker, talking about this other person to somebody. So here, this would show us a woochane. Oops, that's a negative. A woochane. So I respect them, this him or her. This is an ungendered pronoun, so that would actually be them, I think. So then you could say ya awuchane. I respect you. And I could say ach ya ayawane. They respect me. So that you start to learn how to move these things around. For now, this database, it does so much of the work for you. You could write a whole story just using this database. You could write a whole speech just using this database. And not to say you could just look everything up, because you have to figure out how to do that yourself. But while you're learning that, you do have lots of resources at your fingertips. Sheesh. Okay. Any other questions that you folks were thinking about? Yishedi.
Think of that verb book.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Oh. What do you think of the verb book?
Oh, it's fabulous. It's
I remember when I first took it to Tlingit in the mid-90s, Elaine Abraham was mixed on the Nash book.
Yeah, so we're talking about this one. It's got a yellow cover. We scanned it and it's black and white. Lots of verbs in here. So if the way this one works is there's an English section and then a Tlingit section. There's also like some stuff in the beginning and some stuff at the end that talk about grammar. I recommend reading it. Some of it's changed quite a bit in terms of we don't see it really that way anymore. But it's so fun because it's like 50 years old, and so, but if we go down to respect, so here's R, and we'll scroll on down and we'll see what it has for respect. And so we see it right here, ḳaa ée ayáade. So there's a couple things. One is they note the classifier a little bit different than we do today. Let me try and and then they have some sample sentences. So the one thing that it didn't really show you necessarily how to change them. And I think also at this time, that sort of middle ground between English and Tlingit wasn't as well documented. Like, how do you teach someone who knows English, how do you teach them Tlingit? And so I think it has lots of verbs listed. I think they did a pretty good job of capturing aspects of Tlingit culture. So you'll see them talking about medicine people in this book, which is good because it was written by 2 missionaries, and sometimes missionaries were really against any form of indigenous ways of sort of seeing spirituality and healing and different things like that. There's quite a few sentences in here that you could say, okay, these are missionizing sentences. But I think they capture pretty accurately an awful lot of verbs. It's not the most user-friendly text, just in terms of like showing you how to now use that verb. So it's kind of getting archived a bit, but the goal is to take everything in here and to put it into a new resource in terms of going forward. And then the other thing is, this is primarily speakers from Yangon. So if you were from Yakutat, which is what Ḳaa Ée was saying, like you might be kind of frustrated, or if you're from Tesla, you might be a little frustrated because you would say some of these things differently. If you were Southern Tlingit, you might say some of these things a little differently. The other thing is, yeah, they tended to write some of the vowels that are actually short. They would write some of them long. The writing system has changed a little bit from here. Not a whole lot, but you'll see this downward tone mark, and that's just unmarked these days. There's no reason to mark really a long low tone. And then it is a little bit sanitized. What's that?
Oops.
So it's also a little bit sanitized in terms of can't poop, can't pee, can't make more people. So there are those verbs do exist, and so I think also that language resources don't necessarily have to be censored, but it's also a tricky sort of thing because when do you drop there's some verbs that your auntie and uncle might teach you, and at some point we'll cover them because if you're gonna use a language, it's not like, you know, and it's a bit of a tricky business as well because some of us are raising our kids and we want to say like, hey, say like wipe your butt. It's, you know, and so you got to go ask elders that, and some of them will get a little upset because they don't want to talk about that. But I think it's important to be able to say these things in the language if you'd like to. Okay. Yes, and so yeah, let's talk for a second here, since we're on the subject about the dialects of Tlingit and how this stuff kind of generally works. Let me see. Hold on one sec, folks. So I think I updated this. I just want to make sure these things match. I think they do. Okay, yeah. So the dialects of Tlingit are absolutely tied to migrations. And where you're from ancestrally is how you should probably learn how to speak. However, you can learn how to speak Tlingit and then change your dialect to match where you're from. I do not recommend waiting until you can learn your dialect to learn Tlingit. I think we need to respect the dialects. We need to understand basically how they work. And then we also need to make sure that as many of them as we can help them, that they survive. The dialects are very important. They're tied to the cultural differences among Tlingit people. They're tied to specific ways of talking about things. I think the oldest form of Tlingit was what we'd call Tant'a, and it's gone. The last speakers of Tant'a Tlingit passed away in the 1980s. And there's some things that are definitely different, and it mostly comes down to the vowels, I think. And then you have Ihki, which is Southern Tlingit, which is Sanya, which is basically this area that's kind of red right here. So this is around the Ketchikan area, the northwestern part of Prince of Wales, and probably Kuyu and some of those areas. And then you have Henya, which is the southern or the western part of Prince of Wales. Yeah, so I was catching something in the chat. And then there's Ṭaqchik-an, which I think was called Tuxacan by a lot of people who couldn't speak Tlingit, and that's the northwestern part of Prince of Wales Island. You have this sort of in-between dialect, so it grabs things from Southern Tlingit and it grabs things from Northern Tlingit. The big difference between Southern Tlingit and Northern Tlingit is that there's a falling long vowel here. So like the word for water is heen. So Northern Tlingit would say heen, and Southern Tlingit would say heen. So it would kind of fall down towards the end. So if you talk to some old school folks, they'd usually call it like it's a bit of a sing-song kind of a tlingit, is how I heard people talk about it. And they're also more likely to have contractions in the front of a verb. The other big thing between the dialects is whether you have an A sound or an E sound. So if I'm going to say, are you ready? I might say, yun ge yi wune. So yun ge yi wune. So ne is how I would have the ending of that verb, yi wune. If I was speaking Southern Tlingit, I would say, yun ge yi wuni, and also in Teslin. Right, so there's the A to the E is another common thing you'll see with dialects. The other sort of major things with dialect is sometimes you're going to have an sound, and sometimes you're going to have an sound. So we might say hus for a plural group of people, and in Carcross they might say hes. So hus, hes. So that's another dialect difference. And the other prominent one is the M sound. So we might say unayáade for windy. And I say we just because I am from the coast. When I say we, I'm not saying like we're the thing and they're the other thing. But folks in Teslin say unayáade. And so those are ones we can figure them out. You can catch them. The other things that are different with dialects is sometimes you just have a different word for the same thing. So in some places, moccasins would be ʼadudli.átk, and in other places they'll be ʼcéistíl. And those are just some things that you'll learn. Cake has a pretty significant dialect. They do a lot of work to keep their dialect going. Teslin has a very significant dialect, and they're doing work to make sure, like, we want you to talk like you're from here. So the other thing is there's this sound n. So it's a somewhere between an N and a Y. It's up in your nose. And that sound we'll usually write with a Y with 2 dots over it, like you'll see right here. So to tell a group of people to stand up, a lot of folks on the coast would say, gaidanak. Everybody say, gaidanak.
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 In Teslin, they would say, gingdanak.
Gimdanak.
Gingdanak.
Gimdanak.
So you get this sound in there. And that's this sound. That might be the only place. I hear it in Klukwan. Yakutat speakers, they were making that sound. But the dialects are totally linked to migrations. They're totally linked to interactions with other languages. And they're important parts of our history. The other thing that's a dialect is for Carcross and Teslin, there's times when this oo sound will become an o sound. And it seems to be when this vowel is surrounded by any of these consonants with the underline on it, it'll often switch to the o sound. So for example, for a box, folks on the coast might say pook, and folks in Teslin might say poke. And so those are the dialects, and there's lots to it. It's really fun. So we do try to mark that. So if you look something up and you see like a Y in parentheses, that's Yakutat. If you see a T in parentheses, that's Teslin. And so we try to mark like where we're hearing that so that folks can say, and then if you learn something and then you go back home and you're using Tlingit and somebody corrects you, like just switch it over. It's like, oh, that's how we say it here. Great. And so a lot of what we do as well when we learn Tlingit is we're learning an artificial form of the language, and that's very difficult for a lot of people. For some people as a learner, that's difficult. Well, I don't sound like a Tlingit speaker. Well, of course not. You're learning it. And sometimes that's difficult for people who know Tlingit. They'll say, oh, you sound bad, or you sound like this or that. But it's okay, because you can adjust it as you continue to go forward, as you hear it more, as you say it more. And so we are not looking for perfection here. We're just looking for use and to build on what folks have learned already. So let's take a little break, and maybe we'll come back. We'll talk about vowels a little bit, because vowels are important. We might talk about a few different sounds, if there's some sneaky sounds that you folks want to practice before we move into something else. And then we'll just start taking a look at a Tlingit verb and how it works. And then we'll probably just learn some names of things, and then we'll just engage in a bit of a conversation. So why don't you take 10 minutes, and we'll come back at 1:45. Somebody just called me a verb.
This is close. Close. Yeah, don't.
Okay. So, folks, where did you guys get as far as making the sounds and looking at the letters? Anybody want to give me a recap? This would be yesterday.
We went through. I was in the very beginner group, so but we went through all the sounds, and she had a slideshow with a word that used that sound, and we practiced each one. But I know we got through the consonants. I don't remember if we did all the vowels.
Okay.
The vowels were in the words, but I don't think we like talked about them separately.
Okay. Okay. So we'll do this for a little bit. I know some of you are probably anxious to do something a little bit more advanced, and we'll get to something. One is like every one of these represents a letter, just in terms of how do we learn how to read and write in Tlingit. I think the first thing is like we have one symbol, one sound. There are lots of sounds, so you end up with lots of symbols. But I think one thing that can help you learn how to read and write pretty fast is just counting the letters. So we're not talking about the individual characters. Like, so if you look at this word over here, and we can just say this together, this word right here, chak, chak, chak. So this is a bald eagle. This is an eagle. And this is a three-letter word. So really, we're just, how many sounds? You have ch, So if you were counting like the individual sort of letters, like you might think about in English or something, you'd say, okay, there's a C and an H and an apostrophe, and this A with this tone mark, and then this other A, and then a K, and then an apostrophe. But if we could just transition from that to thinking about spelling in Tlingit, like there is only one symbol that makes this ch sound, and it's this one right here. So it has these three characters, but if you think of that as a single letter, I think the reading and writing does help come quite a bit faster. It gets complicated because you had a lot more people that could speak Tlingit than that could read and write in Tlingit. And literacy does not make you any more advanced than anybody else. Like, we really want to become speakers. But the reading and writing part is a wonderful tool for second language learners. The whole goal is to get off the book. Like, I was just listening to Nora the other day, and she was saying, you go to make a Tlingit speech, and you're not supposed to take notes. You're not supposed to write something on your hand or on your arm, or you're supposed to just have it. But while we get to that point to get off book, it's okay to use these. It's okay to as tools to help you learn, to help you remember, to help you sort of figure some things out. All these ones that are this kind of orangish color are not in English. And so those ones are probably going to be some of the ones that present the bigger challenges to you. What we're going to go over today is just the vowels, and then we're going to kind of cruise through the consonants kind of fast, but maybe stop and talk about a few of the trickier ones along the way. This evening, we're probably not going to break into a smaller group, just that we have the whole class, so we don't have to pause the recording. Although there'll be other days where we do break into groups to do stuff. And maybe we'll see how everybody feels. Let us know how you feel tomorrow. You can let us know anytime. But tomorrow we'll have a bit of a chance for you to talk back to us and to let us know how it went, how it's going. We could have potentially 3 different Zoom meetings where maybe there's 3 of us that are doing different things at different times. We're recording all the sessions. You know, but it's also good, I think, to spend some time together and just to see each other as the whole language community as well. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at some vowels. Vowels are important in Tlingit. I think to start thinking about vowels, I would say there are 4 vowels in Tlingit. But each of these four has four variations. So the vowel can be low, high, short, long. And there's times where it's going to move back and forth. And ah can become ah. That can happen. It does happen. But then the big thing, I think, for learners of Tlingit, the vowel length and the tone really determine a lot with how the language should sound. A lot of times as we're practicing early on, I'll make this higher than it should be, just so that we can sort of catch it. I think some things, if you're having trouble with the tones, you could do some things like just raise your hand when you see the tone go up. Raise your whole arm if you have to. Bring your eyebrows up. Do something just to help yourself to see that it's there. Because tone is a big part of the Tlingit language, you have to continually think about the adjustments that you make. So that if you're asking a question, Tlingit does it not with a rising tone. It does it with grammar. Okay, there's certain things that get put in there to make it a question. Okay, so we're going to go from the top left. We're going to go to the right, drop down, go to the right, drop down, go to the right, drop down, go to the right. We'll do them each maybe twice. Ah.
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 Ah. Eh.
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 Eh. Eh.
A.
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 Eh.
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 E.
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 O.
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 Ooh.
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 Ooh. Ooh.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Ooh.
And then we'll do the Tesla ones. O.
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 And I see a hand up, but just listen to this part. So I'm going to go across. I'll do them all. And you don't have to repeat. Just listen. Eh. 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 A. I. E. O. Ooh. Ooh. And so that's what they sound like, right? So those are the vowels. Every single time you see an EI, it's an A sound. Every time you hear A, you write EI. So just in terms of like how do these vowels get written, it's just something to just start figuring out that sort of pattern. Okay, raised hands. What's the questions?
I think you were just starting to answer mine as the two O's that you said. One is Teslan, but it's an O with the line underneath the bottom.
Yes.
So like the English sound O, O.
Yeah, like the English sound O, like go or Coke and Coca-Cola.
Okay.
But that O sound doesn't really exist outside of Tesson, except for this one really short phrase that goes ho ho. It's not very common, but sometimes it's used.
Santa, what does it mean?
Sometimes it's used to put emphasis on things. Like most commonly, you hear people say "Gunnish cheese ho ho." But there's times I saw Walter Soboleff give one of his final speeches, and he stood up and he just stared as lots of people. His celebration was starting, like 1,000 people or something there, and he stood up and he just went, ho 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 ho. And as he did, I was like, this is important, right? And so it's just sort of it puts a little bit of emphasis on stuff, and then yeah, Ḳaa Ée, you want to tell us about your the rounded A sounds that y'all have?
Yeah, so these, we don't really write them because they, as far as we can tell, they're not really phonemic. It's just like a thing that happens sometimes where words like, for example, knock, which means medicine, get pronounced as nok. Yak gets pronounced as yok. And there's other things too, like the way that my gram would say odigan is odigan or udigan. She would kind of go back and forth between those two. So it's just a rounded and sound. We don't write it, but just to know that that exists, so it doesn't surprise you, and it's really not something that they're not their own sounds. It's just variations of sounds.
Yeah, and I think similar, like you'll hear people say yak, where there's no rounding of this. And by rounding, we mean like if you put a W on there, that's what we call rounding, because a W sound, your lips go like a kissy face thing, and then a Y sound, your lips do like a smiling type of thing. But you'll hear other people who say yauk, and you'll hear that rounding of it before it gets to the K. And so, yeah, as we sort of write Tlingit and read Tlingit, you also have infinite variations of Tlingit. So we're just really getting a rough estimate, as close as we can probably get it. But then it's up to you, like as you learn more Tlingit and as you start to write what people say, how accurately do you write what they say? Like when we listen to Kuchain, Frank Catalio, there's an awful lot of those, the Y with the dots over it. Like they are just popping up all over the place. And we try to write them down because we're like, well, there was something there because he was born, he's from Yakutat and born in the 1860s probably. So you're really getting something there. Yishkaku, what's that the name?
Why? There's a spelling inconsistency. But then, and that's all the same English letter. But then we have EI for A, and then the third line's even worse. And the fourth line, we're using different English letters for the same vowel. And I can, on one hand, I can understand where it comes from in that there are English vowels that sound that way. But in terms of consistency for Tlingit, it's not there.
Yeah, so there have been decades of hot debates on how to write Tlingit. So you could certainly step back into those debates. Like standardization is very difficult for languages, especially indigenous languages that haven't been written, because you'll sort of get a population who can read and write a certain way. Then some people say, no, we've got to change the thing. And some of it makes a lot of sense. Haida goes I to a double I and U to a double, to two U's in a row, not a double U, but and so that would be I, U. And so you could sort, but then what would make the A sound using English letters? I don't really know, right? Like, so I guess it would be AI, right? That's how you'd like bait or ATE.
Well,
No, but hate. The problem is English is a crappy system. So we shouldn't be following it. I mean, if you want to write it in IPA, maybe you'd be getting better, but you got to drop the English, man. It's crazy.
Right.
Well, one could simply say and then use two E's for A and two E's for A, and then two I's instead of the two E's. That would be consistent. But as you point out, everyone would have to retrain and they don't want to.
Yeah, and so there's a lot on these orthographies. There's a whole other writing system that was developed that would take would basically, so that's what that one would look like. That's what that one would look like. And then this one would look like, let's see if I can remember how to do this. So it would look like that. And then this one would look like that. So that's what some folks proposed. They said, now look, you've got one letter and you just change the symbol up above it. And so you would do the same thing all the way across. But the difficulty that was with this one is one, like these characters are a little harder to do, like just with a common keyboard. And the other thing is like vowel length is a big thing. So are people going to really be able to remember that that is long? And so hotly contested, the vowel wars. And so we'll probably all like, we'll look back or our descendants will be like, oh, the vowel wars of the aughts were, those are intense. Yeah, people have been, they've gotten really mad about this stuff. And it's just tricky. But as far as what we've got and the way it's been standardized, like we just sort of got to remember that EI is an A sound, the I to the EE. And it doesn't take too long before you start to get it. But because the big thing here is sort of like the length and the tone. The length and the tone. You have to always keep an eye on the length and the tone. I was, and probably still am, a chronic shortener and flattener. I've heard the criticisms, sometimes nicely and sometimes very mean. Some people are very mean. But yes, so, and then the big thing is like, let's make it sound like Tlingit. And then, but yeah, it's always interesting to talk about. ʼadudli.átk, Asa. Oh, I can't hear.
Sorry. I remember, I'll just add real quick, back in '95 when I took my first Tlingit class with Elaine Abraham Chusha, she also mentioned that some of the reasons why they came up with the alphabet like this and using English characters for Tlingit sounds was just because of typewriters. Instead of having to create a whole typewriter, and computer boards, they just wanted to make it so it can be modernized and easier to use and making up symbols. So
yeah, sheesh. And there's some folks like I think Barbara Cadiente and probably Ronalda Cadiente, and they did a lot of that work. So typing and then going in and making these marks by hand and then going through and sort of photocopying that stuff. And so now like there's an app called Chert, CHERT, which will allow you to install a keyboard directly onto your, there's a few steps involved. If you're not really good with technology, find someone who can help you. And then but you can use all these characters with the Chert app. And then there's a keyboard if you're using a Mac computer or an Apple. There's a keyboard called the Crippen keyboard. And if you're using a Windows computer, there's Language Geek is one keyboard, and then the Jill Meserve keyboard is another one. And so there are keyboards. It's a little bit of extra labor to install these onto your machine, but they will help you to be able to type in Tlingit, because this is not an O with an underlined formatting. This is a combined diacritical marking. So the other thing is, as you start to work in Tlingit, not every font is going to work. So if you want to use your fancy, looks like handwriting font, like you might have to go in and draw those underlines later. Satuk.
I really like the vowels. I find them easy and they make sense. And what I really like is it's one-to-one. Whenever you see that short A, it always sounds like that short A. It's not like English that changes, with whatever the word is. So I highly recommend that people memorize these. And when you're listening, it's amazing how quickly you'll be able to hear them. You'll know if it's a long E or a short E.
Yeah. Goodness cheesh for sharing, folks. And some of these consonants are going to take a lot of your attention because you got all these wild sounds that you got to make now, and your mouth is going to be freaking out, and your tongue and the back of your throat, and everything's going to be getting tired. But just keep in mind the vowels are probably the part that are going to be perhaps most commonly misused in terms of, that's where a lot of errors are going to be, but because they start to change, right? So like you would say yange yiwune kleshyan uwane, and then you would say gende yekakwane, right? So the verb is going to start moving back and forth, and it's predictable, but there's another component that you're going to see, and you'll also see things like chak, which is this vowel right here for an eagle, but if you had a place name called Eagle River, it would be this one, Chakhini. And so those are things that do happen in the language. They start to shift. Okay, I see hands up. I can just give you guys high fives because they look like high fives to me. Who has a question?
Will you repeat the definition of a long A?
Yes. So this one is short, so it goes This one is long, so it goes ah, eh.
So are the two columns on the right are the long sounds?
Yes.
Okay.
So these
Thank
ones
you.
are long, these ones are short.
Thank you.
This is low, and these are high. Okay.
Out of curiosity, is there any like musical notation that goes with this, like quarter note, half note? Is it double long? Do I need to be that precise?
Well, that's a really good question. There are times when a high is higher than another high, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wasa'iyati, you have wasa, or you might say wasaway. Those are all high. Wasaway, and the first one's higher than the other two.
Yeah.
So there is like stress, like English has stress. So like there's a primary stress in every English sentence. And I think Tlingit probably has something similar, but nobody's really studied that, I think. And then there are times, there's not really like really getting into, there's just short and long. But there are plenty of cases where it could go either way. So you can say, ach, hiti. You can say, ach, hiti. And that's totally fine. Okay?
Yes.
Other questions? I see folks got hands up. Just ask them. Or do you have thoughts, things you want to share?
Yeah, so it's more of a, you were talking about the accents in certain fonts. And I've discovered that some fonts, like if you look at them in Photoshop, they'll have a TT next to them. So Cambria is a fine one. If you create it in Cambria, it'll do the Tlingit fonts. And then if you convert it to a fancy font, it keeps them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gonna cheesh. Now we're finding all these kashuk shortcuts. Ikecha. That's fabulous. Yeah, because I do a lot of hand drawing of, because you want to do stuff in Illustrator, Photoshop. Yes, that'd be great to put those on. And yeah, so someone just put the Language Geek keyboard into the chat. Cheesh. And yeah, there's a lot of variation in terms of these things and the vowels, and there's some other breathy sort of vowels, and there's some things that, like, there's a lot that can be studied here. And then when you get into the prefix of a verb, it's a little different because the vowels just get you to the next consonant, I think. So there's a whole bunch of A's, and they could start to fall out too. So there's some interesting stuff there that we'll get to. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts you want to share? I see your hands. Should I put you guys' hands down? Or else I just...
Just a thought here. Looking at like Sheldon Jackson book, it's similar to writing now, or you can understand it. And then like the Verb book and some earlier writing, you look at it and you almost can't figure it out. It's lots of A's, lots of O's, and it doesn't look similar. But you can kind of see it, but it's a lot more work.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll go find, I probably won't share it tonight, but I'll share it either tomorrow or Monday, the decoder key for if you want to read the stuff that Swanton wrote and that De Laguna wrote, and that they wrote it quite differently than Emmons. And so like, then you get into some stuff because, yeah, that'll be good to have, is to look at that. Just so that if you go look stuff up, some of the older texts, and a lot of that's being retyped these days as well. Luckily, we've got like a whole fleet of folks who like to just retype and Tlingit because I think it helps them to learn. Yeah. Okay. Let's. So in terms of like these sounds, right? We're gonna jump ahead a little bit. There's some videos out there that show you how to make some of the sounds. Some of them are pretty common. The W sound, the M sound. There are a few, like jumping ahead to this one. And I just want to talk about the mechanics of what you're doing here. When you have this apostrophe here, you are actually turning your lungs off and you're making the sound with the air in your throat. So instead of going, like if we just put an A vowel right here, you have cha. But with this one, you have cha. So that's why the CH comes out so much more forcefully, because basically if you want to practice this, you got to make a ch sound while holding your breath. And for those who are learning Tlingit, the key is to not have a great big gap here between this sound and the vowel. And so it's not a great big gap, but like a lot of people who are learning Tlingit, they'll say eat. And you just hear that pause in there where you're really going for eat. And the other thing that tends to happen is once you do this, you tend to do that on the very next consonant. So you're like, oh, we're doing that thing. So then you'll go eat. And that T will come out really hard. And so, but there's a number of these. Whenever you see this apostrophe, that means you're making that consonant without your lungs. Let's see, what are the other things I wanted to point out? This one, I got lots of notes on this one. This sound is a voiceless L. So here's another critique of the Tlingit alphabet is like, when people see this L, they want to go, ooh, la, 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 la. That sound does not exist in Tlingit. So some of the things that you have to do is like, convince yourself to, when you see this letter L and you're reading Tlingit, that you're making the sh sound. So this sound goes sh. What you're doing here is the tip of your tongue is going up right behind your teeth, your cheeks are relaxed, and you are blowing out the sides. It's a very similar sound, I think, if somebody has a lisp and they have an S sound, they will commonly make this sound, right? A lisp. And so it's not a speech impediment. They just need to come over here and speak Tlingit. Forget about the English. So this is probably one of the most mispronounced sounds because people like to say thank you in Tlingit, which is so nice, so nice. But even like the word, so here's another, you thought the vowel debate was hot. You should see the war over the TKL for Tlingit. I think whole friendships have ended and families have fallen apart and clans have declared war. And so here, this sound to say Tlingit, which is commonly spelled T, pronounced with a K, because it's actually this sound right here. And then you see that those are both short vowels. The second one's high. Llingit. Llingit.
Llingit.
Llingit.
Llingit.
Llingit.
Llingit.
And I saw, Nawea, you had your hand up.
Oh, oops, that was an accident.
Okay. I thought we were going to have a fight over the T and the K. But here's the thing. It's like a loaded political thing. So as folks come here and they're like, who you guys? And they're trying to figure it out. We'll say, oh, Llingit Wuhan. And so they'll say, did you say Klingit? Did you say Klingit? Klingit. Oh, did you say Tlingit? And so, but politically now it is spelled with a T, pronounced with a K. And that's tied to like there's whole organizations, Klinkits, there's all kinds of Klinkit stuff, Klinkit this, Klinkit that. And so it's actually probably a K and another K. I don't think people are saying Klingit, right? Klinkit, like 2 Ks are in there, I don't know. But so if you speak Tlingit, then you should probably say Tlingit. And if you speak Tlingit, then you should probably write Tlingit. But if you're going to write this in English, it gets weird because then like people are going to say Lingit. Are you guys Lingit? And we're not Lingit. We're not Klinkit. We're not Tlingit. This word means a human being. But it also can be talking about a Tlingit thing. Like Tlingit Kusti. That would be a Tlingit culture. Tlingit Yukatungi. Tlingit language. Tlingit Chenach. Said in the Tlingit language. So this is the last sound practicing we'll do. We might do a bit more of this stuff tomorrow. The sounds are important, but we're gonna move on to something else as well. These are things you continue to practice, and also like if you have an accent, it's fine because you just find those components of your accent that you just choose to work on and to finesse so you sound more and more Tlingit over time. So to say thank you, there is this L smooshed right between a vowel and the CH sound. I see a hand up. I want to make sure I don't miss your question before we move on to this.
I've heard Kszawak actually pronounced Kszawak. Like like the K wasn't really present. And that's how my auntie had said it before.
Oh, say it one more time. Okay. Can you say it one more time?
Kszawak.
Oh, okay.
But it's almost non-existent K at the end.
So it just sort of. So sometimes there's this little period right here, right? And what's in the middle of a word, you kind of you'll stop, right? So almost like the English word uh-oh, where you just close your lungs and open them kind of fast. But sometimes a word will end with that sound. Like, so you'll say ha, and has an abrupt end to the vowel. So those times we were putting an apostrophe there, which we're borrowing from Haida, because you couldn't really tell if that was at the end of a sentence, right? And so there's a few inconsistencies in our writing system. Tlingit is hard. Writing systems are always like, you got to kind of make these decisions somewhere. But so Kszawak is how I've heard that community, but it could be, yeah, like maybe that K just sort of falls off, right? But so you certainly have this sh at the end. Other places we're going to have something like a kla sound. You might have a TL. So there's a lot of people saying, my name is something claw, like a claw, like an eagle claw in English. Where that word is probably claw, which is a mother. And so as we sort of look at finessing Tlingit back to Tlingit, because when a population loses its whole language, it goes through a bunch of these shifts. And some of these shifts are like, is that a dialect thing? Did it shift because there's not enough people speaking Tlingit now and it's become hot gla as opposed to hot la? And these are just some things to sort of, as we work on sound, sometimes we'll also point out like things that need to shift back towards tlingit. So gulchish for sharing. Okay. Okay, we're going to say thank you, then we're going to look at verbs, and we're going to have a short conversation. So we're going to look at this in 3 parts. So everybody say g.
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 Nash.
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 Cheesh.
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 So this sound right in the middle is the one that sometimes changes to a SH. I hear people say gunnach cheesh, or they say gunnach cheesh. Just because this L gets a little bit, you're going and that can be a tricky transition. I think a harder transition is going from that to the underline X. There's a word, wealth, which is shanash. That one can be a little trickier than this one. But this one, we put it all together. We get gunnach cheesh.
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 So when you make this L sound, you gotta keep your cheeks really relaxed. I think English requires like lots of facial tension. Tlingit does not. Tlingit is, it's all behind the teeth.
Yeah.
All behind the teeth.
You gotta step on it.
What about Ganesh cheese? Oh,
Yeah, so the ho part is like putting extra emphasis on it. So you can ramp up your thankfulness. So you could say goodness cheese ho ho. So you could throw that at the end. You could also say goodness cheese ha. And so the ha is also like putting emphasis. You say goodness cheese ah. And so all 3 of those you're just putting a lot on there. If you wanted to really, maybe we'll do an exercise in thankfulness. Let's see, let me get rid of all of that. This here. So we've got Kunachish. So then we could say, and that's usually how we've been writing this one, right? And I know we just did the underline O thing. And so again, there's just some finer points that we're still figuring out as a language community. But for this one, you say, Kunachish ho ho.
Goodness cheese. Ho ho.
Goodness cheese ho ho.
Goodness cheese. Ho ho.
Let me see. Let me fix one thing on here. So then we're going to add goodness cheese ha.
Goodness cheese. Ha.
Goodness cheese ha.
Goodness cheese. Ha.
Goodness cheese ha.
Goodness cheese. Ha.
This ha part is often translated as you see, and so it'll pop up sometimes, just like really, and Tlingit, when it puts emphasis on something, it points back to what was just said. That's a very common pattern. And then we'll do 3 more variations. So this would be technically big thank you. So we'll say, goodness cheese plain.
Goodness cheese. Plain.
Goodness cheese plain.
Goodness cheese. Plain.
And then this one would be many thanks. Plain goodness cheese.
Tlen gunash
Klein gunnel cheesh. Then one more that Ḳaa Ée has provided for us. And there's a whole bunch of phrases you can get that it comes from a verb. Long time ago, this was a verb, but over thousands of years and millions of uses, it sort of gets frozen. So the verb root here is cheesh. It means to be possible. One of the things as we sort of analyze this word, it certainly looks like a verb. You can see a classifier. There's some other components in there that are a little bit trickier to figure out. Probably a ga and a and a na are in there. Those of you who have been doing this for a while, you'll sort of see those parts. And there was probably a tlech in front of it long time ago. And tlech on its own means not. So it's going to pop up and it'll make any verb negative. So the verb goes negative and the verb will change. So you go from yak-e, good, to tlech-uk-e, not good. So that verb, yak-e, uk-e, it changes, right? It goes through several different changes, which if you're new to Tlingit, you will learn to understand those changes. And you will become excellent predictors of those changes. So you have this tlech can very often contract just to this sh sound, which can mean not, or it can sometimes mean without. I think it just means not, though. So one of the theories is that shkunashchish is because it means it wouldn't be possible. And probably the longer version, way long time ago, is it wouldn't be possible without you. But when we point stuff out like this, we're not trying to say, that doesn't mean thank you. That means it's not possible. No, we're just saying like there's an origin to these words and we can trace them back. It does mean thank you. That's what you're saying. It could also mean I am thankful, because you could tie this to other things. And that would be awkward if you just said thank you. Thank you for me seeing you. That's really what you're saying. But you're saying I'm thankful to see you, right? So sometimes we got to rearrange the words when we put it into English. So this last one, goodness, cheesh.
Goodness cheese.
Goodness, cheesh.
Goodness cheese.
Okay, Ḳaa Ée.
Goodness cheese. Ako arichawe yaktata. Achtuch John Jack Ellis, Wanix Emma Ellis, zuhast du geitgeef sikuyata. Okay, yeah. I heard this one in just really old recordings of some Yakutat speakers, the ones I just mentioned.
Okay. Cheesh inki nikita. Echawe chago hako. Adeus alkenya. Takawe awa. Hai has altu. Awa ade yu kayatangiya. Singit enach. Kecha. Okay. For the last half hour, and the sounds are important. I know a lot of us are building up these sounds, like how to make them. All these, there's a whole bunch of things you can do to practice. You got to keep a lot of saliva in your mouth, I think all the time, but when you're first getting started, I think you got to pay a lot of attention to that. I had students and they used to like line up like sour Skittles and certain drinks and lots of water and tea, whatever. And just going through and making the sounds, it's going to make your mouth kind of tired too. When you start sort of making the and the and then also to be able to differentiate between those when you're saying them and when you're hearing them, which can get really tricky. But we're going to sort of shift away from that, and we're going to do something for the folks who've been studying for a while as well. And again, like chime in with thoughts, chime in with questions. If those of you who've been studying Tlingit for a while too, like jump in, give us your perspective, share some things. I don't want you to get too bored just sitting there, listen to the same thing. I already know all this stuff. I know it all. So gonna sheesh everyone. We're trying to like just hit a little bit of everything and just sort of really make the language accessible, really bring the language community together. Okay. Okay. And people, I think if you're on your phone or something too, sometimes you'll just hit something and it'll raise your hand. And so, does the mouth produce more saliva from dried fish? If you want to send me dried fish, I will certainly test this theory. Gallon bags are just fine. No, I'm just kidding. That's a really good question. Yeah, I try to, like, if I'm doing sound practice stuff with folks, like, yeah, I certainly got to drink a lot more water when I do that. But I'm sure there's things that certainly help. So, okay.
And if I knew you'd take dry fish, I would have sent you some from Holy Cross.
Ḳaa Ée. I'm always accepting dry fish. I'll just put that out there. The dry fish hand is always out there. Ādudli is what we call it. Ādudli. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I know. I'll throw a bit of a curveball at you guys. So I thought we'd do like an intro to the verb, but we might save that for tomorrow. And I think what we'll do is we'll look at some opposites because I think it's fun. And I'll tell you guys a little bit of the history of this. So when we had our kid number 1, hold on, my screens are. We found this, there. We found this little set of cards at a used toy store. And it was opposites. And I was just messing around with my kids trying to figure out like how we would say these things. And there was a whole bunch of them that I had no idea. So I took it to the masters. And I want to introduce you folks to, I think tomorrow we'll do a thorough introduction. Those of you who speak Tlingit, be prepared to talk about Ḳeochne and Khoyinak Sakanan. Yoach Twasagu. Hastu igach tutletu, hastu yejne da, gosle shukwa ayi, Wooch unayáade ʼadudli.átk. We'll talk about Nora, Marx Dowenhauer, and Richard Dowenhauer tomorrow. For now, I want to talk a little bit about Ḳaa Ée and Shakshani. They were 2 of my primary teachers. I was really fortunate to work with them a lot for probably about 6 years. We worked together every Friday. I'd go over to George's house, and Marge would come over. Usually her husband drove her there, and then he would go shopping or go do some stuff and would work for about an hour or 2. Translated a bunch of stuff. So I showed him these things. So basically you'll have 2 puzzle pieces and they're supposed to go together. And they're these opposite concepts. And I thought it was really neat to sort of look at that and think about it in Tlingit. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at it. You'll see it in Tlingit. We'll say it a couple times. If you have a thought or a question, shout it out or put it into the chat. And this is how we'll kind of wrap up today. This will probably get us up to the 8 o'clock time marker. And then tomorrow we're going to do storytelling. If you got language you want to share, we'll talk a little bit about Richard and Nora. Because if you want to talk about Tlingit storytelling, they're pretty critical to this whole state of storytelling right now. And we'll also talk about some current storytellers that we know. And then I'll share a couple of stories. If you have some stories you want to share, feel free to share with us. And then we're going to transition it over to you folks having a chance to provide feedback. And feel free to let us know what you think. You know, we're always trying to sort of fit the needs of everybody, but that's sometimes a real challenge. Ḳaa Ée was Taqdain Tan. Yadu Ish has ayat sa di. unayáade yes iti we takteen tan tak oil to qeech a keu what a joy qeech quan ye awe a khaya de yuqatangi aqa awe shakshani ishkitan khsati ya de in auk sayek aya keu what ha hunatsu du has outlet to tlingit chak away daislin adachawe du shagun Cajon Ish, George Davis was from Cake. His clan comes from Huna, but he grew up in Cake. His father is Tsaguidi, and yeah, so he spoke a Cake dialect. Marge Dudson grew up in Douglas, and her family, she spent a lot of time in Huna. She talked about Huna a lot, but her family really gets, their roots are from Teslin, and they were just wonderful. They were so wonderful to work with, so kind. So they were just really good at like working with me and figuring out, like I was trying to figure out like how all these things I wanted to translate and do. And we're very lucky that Goldbelt Heritage Foundation and Tlingit and Haida and Sea Alaska Heritage Institute and the Juneau Tlingit and Haida Community Council all funded a bunch of projects that I was able to do with them. And they're still coming out. Like we'll take a look tomorrow at a book of stories that they pretty much translated. And this Raven book's going to come out sometime in the next year or so. And they were responsible for translating the vast majority of the work that I did in that book. And so I'm so happy to share their work and their wisdom and their words. There's so many things I didn't know how to say that they taught me how to say. And they really, they gave me a lot of support. Doing this work in languages, you just get kind of picked on a lot. That just happens with indigenous communities. If you start taking off with the language, like Cyril George said it best. He said, if they're not shooting arrows at you, you're probably not doing a damn thing. That's what he told me. That's what he told us in class, and I kind of laughed. But if you can, you got to push yourself through that and identify when people are kind of being unhealthy and hurtful. And so luckily when I was able to work with them and people would kind of pick on me for the things I was saying, I'd say, okay, go talk to Cajon Ish about it. He's the one who said it, you know. And anyways, let's look at these opposite concepts. I'll say it, you guys repeat it. Kaudzitich.
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 So that one's a verb. It is crooked or twisted. Add thoughts if you got them. Those of you who speak Tlingit as well. I know you guys have been kind of quiet. It's because we're doing some of the more beginning stuff. Yadachun.
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 So Yadachun is straight ahead. It could also mean straightforward or for something to be straight. It could be used as a description of a person to say they're an honest and straightforward person. It's also a phrase that's used by a song caller to say, sing the vocables. So usually a Tlingit song has vocables and then a verse, then probably the verse again, and vocables and a verse and it ends. That's one pattern. There's several different patterns for Tlingit songs. But if you're getting to the part, like if it's the part that goes, aha, ahua, he, hua, aha, as opposed to do ya, kanakudi, hua, aha. So that first part you'll say Yadachun, and then the group knows to sing the vocables. They should know it already, but then it just helps. Maybe it helps everybody. So there's crooked, straight. Let's get it with I lost my cursor. Shawakit.
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 It is full. And Tlingit loves categories. So full of solids is different than full of liquids. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so there's liquid in there. So we say shawakit. Shawahik would be full of solids. Then it gets empty. Achakti.
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 And so that is quite a bit different than shawakit. It's just like the way that the language functions, and what you'll learn is there's a difference between those. And so, yeah, and like, if you want concepts like, well, is it half full or half empty? Then you say just a katut. That's it. That's just the only way you could say it. And that's halfway, right? Halfway up. Something to be long. Yayet.
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 We're also looking at these short vowel, high vowel. They're both short, but one's low, one's high. Yayet. Short. Yekuwach. Or sorry, yekuwach.
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 If you add tokatat after that, which is the word for pants, then you have shorts. Small. Yegugenk.
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 So this is for a non-living thing to be small. Okay, so yegugenk is a non-living thing. If it's living, you'd say yeksugenk. So it's a little bit different. You'll also hear people with a W right there, very commonly, yegugwenk. If you put cha in front of it, cha yegugenk, it means a little bit. So sometimes there's all this fine tuning that gets done as you learn more and more Tlingit. Like just these little things will make big differences. There's also always, not always, but there's very often these categories: living thing, non-living thing.
Could you say something like if you were to speak a little Tlingit with that?
Say that again.
With the phrase like a little bit, could you say that you only speak a little bit of Tlingit?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So you could say, Ḥaa Ée, just put it in the chat. I understand a little bit of Tlingit. So when you use, it's interesting too, like the verb that you choose. Like if you speak English and you want to know if someone else does, you ask them, do you speak English? If you speak Tlingit and you want to know if someone else does, you'd say, I've got a very short story that's related to this. I heard from a friend of mine, Zeosh, and we used to visit like a lot because he'd come up here a lot while he was doing a lot of his research, and he'd stay at my house and we'd just geek out over Tlingit grammar, usually like all night long. And he says, oh, Nora told me like there was a guy that used to work at Costco here in Juneau, and he was Tlingit, he was a tall guy. And he said, yeah, that guy knows Tlingit. I was like, oh, really? I'm gonna talk to him. I'll talk to him. Yeah, I get excited when I find out people know Tlingit. I was like, I'm gonna go talk to them because that's how I learned. Is I just went and talked to people who know Tlingit. And so he's like looking at my receipts, and he was a pretty quiet guy. I always knew he was pretty quiet. And I said, Tlingit kech iya achch, which is, do you understand Tlingit? And he looked at me and goes, Chaye go gwenk. And he gave me my receipt back. And then we both laughed. So he said like a little bit, right? So yes, so Chaye go genk means a little bit. Yegugenk means it's a small, non-living thing. Then there's a word, I'll put it in the chat for this next question. For Kushtayach is the short way to say it doesn't matter. So you'd say Kushtayach, and then you say the whatever the thing is. Like I might say Kushtayach Tleshtana Achji. It doesn't matter if I don't got no money. I'm going to the store. I don't know why, but really, it'll work out. So kushtiyach is the way you'll say it doesn't matter. But there's a couple other ways. These ones are fun. I'll put them in the chat. And when you're writing in the chat, for those of you who are doing Zoom and learning Tlingit and using Tlingit, if you put an underlined G in the chat, you have to put some. I use just a whole bunch of hyphens in a row and it turns into a line. Because if you don't put something that turns it into a multi-line phrase, the underline will disappear on the G. So chaqiqa is one way, and chanich. Those are both saying the same thing. Chaqiqa, chanich. What they mean is there'll be a verb that comes right after it, and it means you did the verb for nothing. So if I was outside all day building some shed, I'm not a carpenter, and I got done, I was like, and it just fell over. I did it for nothing. And they have meaning too, which is kind of fun. Kushtiyach. I wouldn't know really how to break that down. Maybe if I spent some time. It's just sort of like kushtiyach is like it doesn't matter. This other thing is gonna sort of happen, right? A lot of times, like I'll say it to my kids. They're like, I don't want to. It doesn't matter what you want. It's gonna happen. Sometimes as a parent, you're just out of things. Just out of things to say.
Yes.
But chaqiqa is like, it comes from a verb root, qayq, which is to swing. Like if you got on a hammock or something. So the way it was explained to me is like you push it out, it just comes right back. And the other one is just on the beach, chanij.
Not in town or anything.
Oh yeah, it's nothing to me. Yeah, right. So these are saying like, so we're getting in, there's some different things, sort of like regardless of this, or it's not, it's small, or it's unvaluable. So there's a bunch of different ways to do all these different things. So fun. Okay. Ye kuge.
Ye kuge.
Ye kuge.
Yay, kuge.
Ye kuge.
Yay,
kuge. And big and little is a really difficult concept in Tlingit. Because ye kuge is like, you're really saying it's this big.
It's this big.
This big. So like you could say, ye kuge away. Yata. King salmon was this big. Right? Yage would mean for something to be big, but it could also mean many. It's really interesting. You say, ye kuge hahitki. That's how many houses we have. And then you have Ll'iat, which is tall, which the building could also be Ll'iat. Sorry, I said it long. Ll'iat could be the building is tall. But when I showed them this picture, this is what they said. This is what I went with. Ye kuke, it's big. Ye gugenk, it's this small. There's a bit of a comparative thing going on in here, which is why you have g and also why you have ku. If you've been studying Tlingit for a while, just pay attention to those things. It's heavy. Yedash.
Yadash.
Yedash.
Yadash.
Yedash. Yedash.
Yadash.
And this is something that's similar in English. Like it could also mean like it's important or it's a burdensome thing. ʼadudli.átk. Ḳaa Ée Dultóow Yé. It's a big thing to teach people Tlingit. So Yadash could mean heavy, non-living things. Point that out again. If you want to do the living things, we could do that some other time. And it's not heavy. Ḥesh-udash.
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 So this pops up. That means the verb is not that way. That's usually what that marks, and there's different reasons it'll pop up. It's not always negative things. It is right there, and it is right there. It just gets buried. But so you see, you go from yadash to udash. Yadash, udash. Yadash, udash.
Yadash. Udash.
And this hesh is not.
Ḥesh-udash.
And this hesh can be kleish, klesh, hesh, tish. And so there's got some variations. Some of it is dialect. Tish is something I certainly hear more in Teslin and Carcross, but I also heard Cyril George say it. So. Okay. So these ones were kind of fun because it's a green light. But what's it saying in English, right? Like go? Is that what you would sort of? Because there's no words on these things. That's what they were kind of fun. There's these little puzzle pieces. So when I showed them, they looked at them for a long time. And then Shikshani, she came up with this one. Qunayquh.
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 So these have some fun sounds in them. So let's do this first one. Qunay.
Qunay. Qunay.
Qunay.
Quch.
Quch.
So that's a command. So like if we're in the car and you're driving, but then you see like a bird or something, you're kind of looking at it, and then the light changes, I'd say, Qunayquh. Guk. Start driving. So the qunay part means to start.
Start.
Okay, and it pops up right before the verb. So for the verb to start. And when we get into things moving, it does get pretty complicated. But this is a command form, start, going by boat or car. But then to don't go, this one, they make me laugh. There's a, I'll have to find the link. And I also need to update the page. We have a page for our class. We have a Basecamp thing for our class. Both those should be active. You go to tlingitlanguage.com, learning Tlingit, and then a little submenu will pop up for Ḳaa Ée Dultóow Yé. Ḳaa Ée Dultóow Yé, the place for teaching people. And I gotta update it, but that's where you're gonna find any of the resources for our class. Like every slideshow that we look at, there'll be a copy of it there or a link to it. And then every class that we do, there'll be a link to the class. So I'll update those tonight. I'm a little behind on things. And then also, I'll find a link. I think one of the problems with doing stuff through software, like I think I have a slideshow and you can click on this speaker. This one doesn't work. At least I don't think so. Oh, maybe. No. Okay, sorry. So I made some kind of interactive thing where you can poke it and or click it and it'll say it, and you can hear Shikshani, Kakhwan Ish say these words. But they're funny because a lot of them, they start laughing like immediately after. So this is one where she said it and she laughed and she said, "You're not going anywhere." And then she thought it was really funny. Yes, the name of this workshop is क़aa Ée Dultóow Yé. Okay, so this one, when we say don't do something, sometimes it gets a little long. So I'll say it all together, and then we'll go through it piece by piece. Sheshu iqq. Sheshu iqq. So this first part. Shesh. So we saw the other one, which was klesh, klesh, hesh, tish. Those ones all are not, right? Not this, not that, not here, not the verb, the negative version of the verb. Shlish is don't. So you're usually going to have shlish, and then it's going to end with this underlined K. That's how you get the don't do it. This is one thing that I think is disappearing in Tlingit. A lot of people will say klesh or hesh, heshu iqq, and it's not a real huge loss, but I think it's a significant one. So when we say don't, the first thing we should say is shish. In this part, you. Big fancy verb. Iqq. So that's how you would tell someone, don't drive, don't go, right? Don't go. Well, I guess we'll just stop at the red light, I guess. Any thoughts, questions? Let's see, we got to slide 14. We got to get to slide 62. But we might have to wait till Monday. We'll see how tomorrow goes. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Kechne, Khoyinak, their work. We're going to share some stories. We're going to share some language. I'll put up some stories where you'll have the translations, and then I'll probably try not to read the English. I'll just read the Tlingit so you can hear them, see them. I'll try and give you enough time to listen and also read the English, but I probably won't say the English because you can read it there. If you folks have stories to share, please bring them. And they got to be in Tlingit. I love hearing all kinds of stories, but this is our Tlingit time. And then it's up to you how you want to translate them or deal with that component. And then we'll have some time for you folks to give us feedback. How's it going? What are you gonna, I've had one time, I always think of these things, like I'll be teaching people Tlingit, and then we'll be getting near the end of the semester, and I'll be like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we like did all this stuff? And I'll send them an email like 2 in the morning. And it's like, hey, let's do all this stuff. And then but this was back when we used to see each other and then be marching towards my office, like angry or, and I'm like, okay, well, let's not do that. But I'm always open to hear ideas. I don't like kind of empty criticism, where people say, you're doing it wrong. I'm like, well, how should I do it? and then there's no response. But I do enjoy constructive criticism. How can we do it better? What are you hoping to get out of this? If you're sitting there frustrated and quiet, what do you think we should do? And also it's just a chance for us to visit with each other a bit more, talk about this journey that we're on. Any questions, thoughts? Ďakujem Ée, ach in chisatí yach, asa ach tu yag eich satini. Gwalcha she de hain, a Ḳaa Ée, kelcha jinnachaya guchlitz is, aya hayu gatangi. Yewe ach tu asa good tlach chunach Ée, a joishtucha chatati ide, ye Ée, gulchish, ye ushkach distin.
Cheese.
Cheese.
Nashish Klein. Nashish Suye Quasatin.
Ah,
Zé Costatin Saganin.
ye kwati.
Diagen.
Cheesh.
Sheesh.
Ah, okay.
Cheese.
Ah, cheesh.